Hey everybody, it's Bob Frady
and John Siegman
from PropertyLens. We gather thousands and thousands of data elements to help you understand what you're walking into if you're buying a property. If you're not subscribed, click on the subscribe button. You know how to do that in the YouTube land or whatever the socials are that you're on. Click on the subscribe button. So here's what we like to do. We like to pick a property almost at random. We pick a random zip code across the U.S., and then we go in, we pick out a property, and we say, let's run a PropertyLens report on that property, and then tell you exactly what we see. We don't know beforehand what we're going to pick. We just happen to go in and pick one because we want to make sure everything's right. So today, John, what property have we picked?
We have picked 745 Captiva Court Northeast in beautiful St. Petersburg, Florida.
Now, as many of you are aware, St. Petersburg has had some gnarly weather the last few months with hurricanes flying left and right. So we didn't pick on this house for any particular reason, and that's the zip code that came up. So normally what you would do is you would go to PropertyLens.com, enter in the address, go buy a report. It's $99 for one, $199 for three, $299 for five, if you're looking at multiple properties. But we're going to skip that part because, you know, while it's interesting to our bank accounts, it's not very interesting to walk through on a podcast or a video cast. So, John, why don't you pull up the Captiva Court Northeast St. Petersburg report from your PropertyLens portal, and we'll go through and see what we see.
Our reports are broken into many, many sections, starting with the buyer lens, which is a questionnaire, essentially, that the buyer should ask the seller. And we do that because every state has some level of disclosures. Not all of them are equal. And the only overriding factor that is that if you ask the seller a question, they have to answer to the best of their ability and honestly. But if you don't know which questions to ask, that's a problem. So you can see on this report, 3 potential wind events. We will get back to those very shortly. Property has a high experience of termite infestation. For those of you who don't know, a long time ago, I worked for a little company called Qualitative Marketing Software. They built the first single disk geocoder, and one of their big customers was Sears Termite because they needed to know whose house was getting serviced and then all the houses around them, because when you wipe out termites, you know, you kill a bunch of them, but they go visit all the properties next door.
You mean termites have high mobility? That's crazy. Really? Termites everywhere.
Yeah, high mobility. Who knew? This property is at risk for flooding. We will see that in the map. Hurricanes, it's Florida. Hope that doesn't surprise anybody. This isn't an area of high storm surge. As you will see, it is near a lot of water. It's off a couple of canals and got a little pond and the whole bit. Sinkholes, not just a Florida-only problem, but definitely in an area that has them. Mold, you got heat, you got humidity, you got mold. Property is 40 years old. It's pretty much at the almost end of life for the sewer line. Something you'd want to take a look at. Furnaces, water heaters, you'd want to definitely find out how old those were. This is an interesting one. The county marks it as having a basement. Very few homes in Florida have a basement. This one does not have what would be considered a traditional basement, but the garage itself is 3 feet lower than the rest of the house. So lots of good information that you could find there. Inspector Lens is dedicated to your inspector. So inspectors are really good at what they do. They do it all day long. But here's all the things you want to make sure that the inspector looks for, in addition to making sure all the appliances work and the water heater and the furnace and the air conditioning are all in functional order. So, you know, let's check around the foundation for termites. Let's see what the wind events, if they did any damage to the property. Has there been any flood damage? In this case, in the MLS, it was noted that this property has had some water intrusion in the garage, but not in the property itself because of the 3-foot difference. Definitely high risk for hurricanes. We already talked about that. So these are, again, all of the things that you'd want to print off, hand over to your inspector and say, let's go get some answers for this.
Not that the inspectors aren't going to do this, but sometimes sellers will put pressure on the inspectors not to say too much, because the inspector many times is paid for by the seller. So we just want to make sure that you say, hey, make sure you take a look at these things so I'm comfortable with what I'm buying.
Absolutely. So insurance knows a lot about houses, right? So they know it's in an area for hurricanes. You're probably, you might want to ask the seller if it's insured by Citizens, which is the insurer of last resort in Florida. High sinkhole risk. You might want to find out if there have been any sinkholes near the property. Property is 4 years old. Older properties cost more because if it needs to be updated, it's got to be brought up to code, and code enforcement is always going to cost. And then, what do you need to insure this property for? Well, at least $360,000 is the estimated replacement cost. And replacement costs have been skyrocketing recently because of materials, because of new codes, and because of the cost of labor. To insure this house, it's probably close to the $3,000 estimate. And again, within Florida, these rates are going to continue to go up, and it's going to be pretty hard to get new coverage. So things that you'd want to know going in. Property overview. Here's everything from the county assessor and from the MLS listing. So how many square feet is it? What's the number of stories? Basic appliances. Whether or not it's got a fireplace, all of those good features. Distance to the coast, 112 feet, so it's very close to a surge area, salt water, lots of things that could happen.
I want to talk about that for just a second. One of the things that we have seen in the past is that people think about the coastline as the beach. Where's the beach? What we're trying to show you is where's the distance to water that can impact your property. That's the shoreline to us. So you may think, the beach is 5 miles away, but the surgeable water that can come into your house is 112 feet away. So it's a much different number than a lot of times you'll get from people who are thinking, well, where's the beach?
The beach. That is not the question we're answering. Where is the water that's going to enter your house is the question that we're answering. A pretty good size roof. You're looking at about 34 square if you're going to replace the roof. It's a ranch style house. Slope, the land is flat. There's not much slope to it. It's in the city of St. Petersburg. It's Pinellas County. You can plant whatever you want. Listing details for $695. Current market value range. So we give you all of that.
There's a lot of repetitiveness here about flood, like how the garage flooded, but not the house, which makes you want to make sure that you inspect everything for flood damage in that property. And this is an area that is tricky because there has been flood. It hasn't come over with a transom, but 3 feet is not that much. If you get hit the wrong way, that 3 feet can go up pretty high. Now, what's cool about this house is that the HOA replaces the roof every 15 to 20 years. So the roof age is coming up on needing to be replaced, and they take care of things for you, which is kind of cool. So there's a lot to like about this house, but there's a lot to be cautious about this house as well.
Ownership history. So really key for this is to make sure that if you're not buying a flip, not that there's anything wrong with buying a flip, but you want to make sure that they're typically, if you are buying a flip, that you do massive amounts of inspection, because sometimes the work's not always cracked up to be. But you can see here, this is not a flip. The last time it was sold was in 2017. So the owner has been there 7 years. They've got some experience with the house.
They'll also know whether the property's been damaged. So they'll have 7 years of history by saying, so when you ask them these questions, at least their knowledge will go back 7 years. So you'll get a better description than if somebody had only been there for, say, a year, where I don't know is an acceptable answer because they weren't there for the event.
Historic tax values, all of the pictures from the MLS, roof condition. As Bob noted, the HOA takes care of the roof. Yay. This roof is almost a C. It's, just over the B transom. So it's in okay shape. It'll keep the rain out, which is important because they get plenty of that down in Florida. You can see they've had some wind events recently, October 11th, October 9th, and September 26th. So this is coming off of the most recent hurricanes. So we keep our data very, very frequent and up to date. So if something has happened within the next couple of days, if it was significant, we're going to capture it. We're going to know. So you can see here the 17th was after Milton. There's our favorite little house here in St. Petersburg. Here's one that was taken on October 5th, 2022, another hurricane event. You can take a look at the plants. Notice that there's a lot of trees that went down. Milton was pretty hard on the flora and fauna, but fortunately they all fell away from the house, which is a good thing. Property updates. This is coming from all of the permits. We double source the permits. So we know the new roof was 14 years ago, so it's coming due. Electrical, about 12 years ago, they made a change. Building improvement, 8 years ago. Plumbing, 11 years ago. All of this took place before the current owner stepped in, but it's things that you'd want to ask about. See if they know, and as well as we've shown in others, that you get to find out, if the company is listed, like this case, Precision Overhead Garage Door, we let you know who did the work. So you get to, if you've got questions, you can go back to them. You can find out about them.
That's so aggravating when you buy a house. Like who did everything? Like, you can't even tell. So this way, we at least give you a list of here's who did the work in the past. So maybe you can call them up again in case you need work done in the future.
We noted that this house didn't have solar. Solar would essentially wipe out their electric bill, so it might be something you would want to consider. Risk assessment, not surprising. Flooding, hurricane. It's got some pollution. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Sinkhole, hail, lightning, even wildfire. With the exception of earthquake, Florida is, and winter risk, Florida is a pretty risky state. You can see this picture is entirely red because the entire area is in a 100-year FEMA flood zone. You are going to get wet.
What does that mean if you have a mortgage, John Siegman?
It means that you are required to have flood insurance.
You will get insured through FEMA for this. But there's a couple of things you have to look out for. If you're buying a house that has been damaged by FEMA, that has been damaged by flood and paid for by FEMA, FEMA doesn't require that the work was actually done. They don't need a certificate to show that the work was completed. And we've seen situations where someone has taken the check from FEMA and never done the work. The property dries out, it floods again, and then FEMA says, we ain't paying because the work wasn't done. The work looks exactly the same as last time. So you got to be super careful when you have floods in Florida if they took a claim from FEMA, make sure that the work was done.
Here are all of the details that go behind all of the scores for all of the hazards. Environmental risk or pollution, mold is high here, termites are high here. It is relatively close to a toxic release facility. May or may not be a concern, but you need to know about it. And so we tell you. Closest contaminant sites, that toxic release facility happens to belong to Duke Energy. It is a power plant. It does produce some known carcinogens. You might want to not be downwind from it. Insurability and claims, what the policy looks like, what the replacement cost looks like, total replacement cost for the property, things that will impact your insurance, flood, hurricane, sinkhole, hail, even wildfire, which is, not something most people think of for Florida, But Florida is in the top 10 states for having wildfire and wildfire events.
Right here, we see our friends from Kin Insurance, who do not sponsor this program, but are well known to us as a potential insurer in Florida. So when we give you a quote, what we do is we take the filings and estimate what the amount should be, but we also give you the ability to get an exact quote from one of our insurance partners. In this case, it's Kin.
All right. Health and safety, crime, relatively safe neighborhood.
Yep.
Yay.
Yep.
Fire protection is a B. One of the issues that they have is while they do have fire stations that are close and are professionally paid, which is what you're looking for, it still takes them a while to get there. This is a gated community. You got to get to the gate. You got to get through the gate. You got things that you have to take care of. Property timeline, again, very unusual, but we've got a couple of roof condition visuals that are very close together, 12 days apart. 2 hurricanes will do that to you. So you can take a look at to when things happen. And if you scroll through here, you'll notice that the roof changes color in one of these pictures. They did a good job in replacing it when it was last sold, imagery, and then when all of the permits took place. So you have a pretty good idea, pretty solid history of what happened to this property.
What are the top 3 things that you would look for at 745 Captiva Court Northeast?
First, you got to look for water. You just do. I mean, it's surrounded by water, and it's going to flood. It's in a FEMA flood zone. You have to take a look at that. You just have to. You'd want to see if the raised areas, had access so they could let the floodwaters out. The garage had flood vents. I mean, there's a number of different things that you'd be wanting to take a look for. The second thing that I would look for this property is mold. It's in an area where it happens. You've got heat, you've got humidity, you've got no downtime. So it's not something you want to find after you've bought the house or after you've moved in. So you want to definitely check for that. And then the third thing that I would check for that's not listed in the report, given the age of the house, I would want somebody to go up and take a look in the attic, which they're going to do anyway because they're going to check for termites, and ensure that the roof was strapped to the walls.
Because what can happen if it's not?
Well, then your roof can end up at your neighbor's, and that's never a good thing.
Yes, it can pop off and go twirling down the street. No one likes that to happen.
What would you look for?
I would look for, the top 3 things I would look for. Number 1 is the roof. The roof, they say that the HOA replaces it. You want to talk to the owner about when that's scheduled to happen next, because the roof is approaching the end of its termed life in the HOA. So number 1, I would look for the roof. Number 2, I would look for signs of flood damage. Sure, it's come into the garage, it hasn't come into the house. I would verify that as much as I could. There are a lot of wonderful things about this property and this location. Those are 2 that I would look like. And the third is termites. Because, like you said, termites travel. So you want to look for any signs of termite infestation. And usually an inspector will do a good job at that, but you want to make sure that they take a look. So number 1, the roof. Number 2, flood damage. Number 3, termites.
And there we go.
Well, thank you, John, for yet another episode of PropertyLens Discovers America. We're going to come up with a better title, something catchier, but PropertyLens Discovers America, one property at a time. Listen, if you're buying a property, you got to get a PropertyLens report. If you're buying a property as is, you really need a PropertyLens report. Help you, listen, you may fall in love with the property, and that's A-okay, but you want to know what might be hiding in the house, and we help to tell you. For PropertyLens, I'm Bob Frady.
I'm John Siegman.
Till next time.